The golden rays of dawn painted Houston's skyline as Maya Patel navigated her Tesla Model 3 through the quiet streets. Her smartwatch buzzed for the third time in 10 minutes. Another urgent message from Mission Control about the oxygen filtration experiment currently running on the International Space Station. The backup systems had kicked in, but they needed her expertise immediately. Maya glanced at the time. 6:47 a.m. The morning traffic hadn't picked up yet, giving her a clear path to Space Center Houston. She caught glimpses of her reflection in the rearview mirror. Hair neatly pulled back, minimal makeup, and alert brown eyes focused on the road ahead. In her passenger seat, a tablet displayed real-time data from the space station, numbers scrolling endlessly as she waited for the next red light. The familiar weight of her mission patch pressed against her chest through her silk blouse pocket, a reminder of the 3 successful missions she commanded. Today was supposed to be about inspiring the next generation, with a scheduled presentation for high school students about careers in aerospace. Instead, she found herself racing against time to prevent months of research from being compromised. The flash of red and blue lights in her mirror came unexpectedly. Maya checked her speed. She'd been so focused on the incoming data that she hadn't noticed how fast she was going. With practiced calm, she pulled over, her mind still partially occupied with calculations about oxygen levels and atmospheric pressure. Officer James Miller approached her window, flashlight beam cutting through the early morning shadows. Maya rolled down her window, greeting him with a gentle smile that had charmed mission controllers and fellow astronauts alike. "License and registration, please," he said, his voice carrying the slight drawl of a Texas native. Maya reached for her glove compartment, her movements deliberate and smooth. "Of course, officer." Her watch buzzed again, mission control growing more insistent. The officer noticed the notification. "Busy morning?" "You could say that," Maya replied, handling over her documents. "I'm actually responding to an urgent situation at Space Center Houston." She kept her tone professional, not mentioning her role or status. Years of training had taught her that ego had no place in emergency responses. Officer Miller studied her license, then glanced back at her. "Ma'am, do you know why I pulled you over?" "I imagine I was exceeding the speed limit," Maya acknowledged, her tablet screen flashing with another alert. "I apologize for that. We're dealing with a time-sensitive situation." The officer's pen scratched against his notepad. "I clocked you at 47 in a 35 zone. Everyone's got somewhere important to be, ma'am." Maya accepted the citation with grace, knowing that arguing would only waste precious minutes. Besides, her own teachings to young astronaut candidates emphasized the importance of accepting responsibility for one's actions, regardless of circumstances. As Officer Miller walked back to his patrol car, Maya's phone rang, the direct line from the ISS. She answered through her car's Bluetooth system, already pulling back onto the road as the voice of her colleague, Station Commander Sarah Williams, filled the cabin. "Maya, please tell me you're close. The secondary filters are showing strange readings." 20 minutes out, Maya responded, carefully observing the speed limit this time. "Have you tried recalibrating the sensor array?" The ticket sat on her dashboard, already forgotten as she immersed herself in the complex dance of numbers and procedures that kept 6 humans alive in the harshest environment imaginable. In her trunk, her blue flight suit waited patiently, its NASA patches and mission insignias telling a story of dedication, excellence, and perseverance that would soon intersect with an entirely different system of authority and assumptions. The morning sun climbed higher, promising another scorching Texas day, as Maya Patel, astronaut, scientist, and now traffic offender, raced to save a piece of humanity's future floating among the stars. The Harris County Courthouse stood tall against the morning sky, its limestone facade gleaming in the sunlight. Maya pulled open the heavy wooden doors, her heels clicking against the polished floor as she joined the growing line at the security checkpoint. The oxygen filtration crisis had been resolved just hours earlier, leaving her with barely enough time to change before her court appearance. Next, called the security officer, a man with kind eyes and graying temples. Maya placed her belongings in the plastic bin, phone, keys, and a small tablet containing notes for her afternoon presentation at Space Center Houston. As she passed through the metal detector, her mind wandered to the stars visible from the cupola module, where she'd spent countless hours conducting experiments and gazing at Earth. The line for Courtroom 3B snaked down the hallway, a mix of people from all walks of life. Maya found herself standing between Marcus Rodriguez, a high school senior nervously adjusting his borrowed tie, and Eleanor Washington, an elderly piano teacher clutching a folder of maintenance receipts. Their quiet conversations painted pictures of ordinary lives intersecting with the justice system. "First time here?" Marcus asked, his fingers fidgeting with his tie clip. Maya nodded, a gentle smile crossing her face. "For traffic court, yes." She didn't mention that she'd once given a presentation to the Supreme Court about the legal implications of private space exploration. Instead, she helped Marcus straighten his tie, sharing a story about her nephew's first job interview to help ease his nerves. Eleanor joined their conversation, her warm voice carrying years of wisdom. "I've been teaching piano in Houston for 40 years, never had a ticket until last month. My taillight was out, but I had no idea." She pulled out her phone, proudly showing pictures of her students performing at a recent recital. The courthouse clock ticked steadily overhead as Maya listened to Eleanor's stories, occasionally glancing at her watch. In 6 months, she would be back in space, commanding another mission to the ISS. The perspective from orbit always made earthly concerns seem smaller, yet here she was, part of this very human moment. A young law clerk hurried past, arms full of files, her coffee cup precariously balanced. The scent of fresh coffee drifted through the air, mixing with the subtle hints of lemon cleaner and old wood that seemed to permeate every courthouse. Through nearby windows, sunlight cast long shadows across the worn marble floors, creating patterns that reminded Maya of solar arrays extending from the space station. "Courtroom 3B is now open," announced a bailiff, his voice echoing through the corridor. The line began to move, people shuffling forward with papers in hand. Maya noticed how some clutched their documents like lifelines, while others projected casual confidence that seemed slightly forced. Inside the courtroom, Maya chose a seat in the middle row, smoothing her navy blazer as she sat down. Marcus took the spot beside her, still practicing his explanation under his breath. Eleanor settled 2 rows ahead, arranging her receipts with methodical precision. The wooden benches, polished by years of use, creaked softly with each new arrival. The morning light filtered through tall windows, casting a warm glow across the American flag standing beside the judge's bench. Maya remembered the miniature version of that flag she'd carried on her last mission, now displayed in her home office, alongside photographs of Earth taken from 250 miles above. A murmur of anticipation rippled through the room as the court clerk began organizing the day's cases. Maya observed the choreography of justice about to unfold. Bailiffs taking positions, attorneys conferring with clients, clerks arranging files in precise order. It reminded her of the careful preparation before a space launch, where every detail mattered and nothing could be left to chance. The room fell silent as the door to the judge's chambers opened. Maya sat straight, her astronaut's discipline evident in her posture. In space, she commanded a $150 billion station, but here, in this courtroom, she was simply another citizen waiting for her turn before the bench. Judge Richard Cooper straightened his bow tie before entering the courtroom, a morning ritual unchanged in 15 years on the bench. His chambers felt particularly quiet today, the weight of 97 cases on his morning docket pressing against his temples. He took a final sip of his now lukewarm coffee, straightened the family photo on his desk, and nodded to his bailiff. The familiar words rang out, "All rise." The court is now in session, the Honorable Judge Richard Cooper presiding. The judge settled into his high-backed leather chair, scanning the crowded room with practiced efficiency. After a decade and a half, he'd developed an almost supernatural ability to read people, the genuine remorse, the rehearsed excuses, the nervous energy of first-timers. His glasses perched low on his nose as he began working through the morning's cases. Next case, Martinez versus the state, his clerk announced, passing him a fresh file. Cooper moved through the cases like a maestro conducting a well-rehearsed orchestra. His questions were precise, his judgments swift but measured. The young man with the borrowed tie received a reduced fine and a stern but encouraging word about responsibility. The elderly piano teacher's case was dismissed with a reminder about regular vehicle maintenance. When Maya's case number was called, Cooper barely glanced up from his papers. Another speeding ticket, another morning rush, another excuse about being late for work. He'd heard thousands of variations on the same theme. "Miss Patel," he began, his voice carrying the authority of his position. 47 in a 35 zone at 6:47 a.m. on Highland Street. Maya stood, her posture impeccable, hands clasped loosely in front of her. Something about her composure made Cooper pause, his pen hovering above the standard fine form. Most people shifted their weight, fidgeted, or showed some sign of discomfort. She stood as still as the statue of Lady Justice outside his courthouse. "Would you care to explain the circumstances?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. Usually, he moved directly to the fine for straightforward speeding cases. "Your Honor, I was responding to an urgent situation at Space Center Houston," Maya replied, her voice clear and measured. "While this doesn't excuse my violation of the speed limit, I was attempting to address a critical matter." Cooper removed his glasses, studying her more carefully. Her explanation lacked the desperate edge he usually heard in traffic court. No played-out excuses about alarms not going off or traffic being lighter than usual, just a simple statement of facts. "Space Center Houston," he repeated, a slight note of skepticism creeping into his voice. "And this urgent situation couldn't wait for you to observe the posted speed limit." A slight smile touched Maya's lips, not disrespectful but knowing. The situation involved ongoing experiments that required immediate attention. Lives and millions of dollars of research were potentially at risk. The courtroom had grown unusually quiet. Cooper noticed his clerk staring at her computer screen, then back at Maya, then at her screen again. Something was happening, but he continued his questioning, determined to maintain control of his courtroom. "Miss Patel, while I appreciate the importance of your work, the law applies equally to everyone, regardless of their occupation or hurry." He shuffled the papers on his bench, reaching for his fine stamp. Maya remained perfectly still, her calm presence somehow filling the room. "I completely agree, Your Honor. The law should indeed apply equally to everyone, whether they're on Earth or monitoring experiments being conducted 250 miles above it." Cooper's hand froze above the stamp. 250 miles? His eyes snapped back to Maya's face, finally registering the quiet confidence of someone who had commanded spacecraft worth billions of dollars. His clerk was practically vibrating with suppressed excitement, her hand raised like an eager student with the answer to a difficult question. The morning light streaming through the courthouse windows suddenly felt different, as if the space between Earth and stars had somehow compressed into his courtroom. Judge Cooper leaned forward in his chair, fingers interlaced on the bench before him. The morning sun cast long shadows across his courtroom as he studied the woman standing before him. Something about her demeanor nagged at his judicial instincts, honed by thousands of cases and countless hours observing human nature. "Miss Patel, are you suggesting that your work at Space Center Houston somehow places you above traffic laws?" he asked, his tone carrying a slight edge. The courtroom remained unusually silent, the typical shuffling of papers and whispered conversations notably absent. Maya's hand unconsciously moved to her blazer pocket, where her fingers traced the embroidered edge of her mission patch. "Not at all, Your Honor. I'm simply providing context for my actions that morning. The situation involved critical life support systems." Cooper's eyebrows rose slightly. The typical traffic court excuses involved missed meetings or late arrivals to work. Life support systems were decidedly outside his normal jurisdiction. Still, the law was the law. "Perhaps you could elaborate on these life support systems," he said, removing his glasses and polishing them with a microfiber cloth. "Without the technical jargon, if you please." Maya squared her shoulders, her posture remaining perfect. The oxygen filtration system on the International Space Station began showing irregular readings. As the principal investigator for that experiment, I was called in to prevent potential complications that could affect the crew currently in orbit. A soft gasp came from somewhere in the gallery. Cooper noticed his clerk frantically typing on her keyboard, her eyes widening at whatever appeared on her screen. But he pressed on, determined to maintain the decorum of his courtroom. Miss Patel, while I appreciate the creativity of your explanation, this court deals with facts. The fact is, you were observed traveling at 47 miles per hour in a 35 zone. He reached for his gavel, ready to pronounce the standard fine. Your Honor, Maya interjected smoothly. May I submit something for the record? She reached into her briefcase, retrieving a slim folder with the NASA insignia embossed on its cover. The young clerk practically leaped from her seat, hurrying forward to accept the folder. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it, eyes scanning the contents before carrying it to the judge's bench. Cooper accepted the folder, his judicial mask slipping slightly as he examined the credentials within. His eyes moved from the documents to Maya and back again, noting the official seals and signatures that validated her incredible story. The morning light, streaming through the high windows, seemed to highlight Maya as she stood patiently waiting, her calm presence a stark contrast to the growing whispers in the courtroom. Marcus, the nervous teenager from earlier, had completely forgotten his own case as he stared at her with undisguised awe. These credentials, Cooper began, then paused as his clerk whispered something urgent in his ear. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly as he processed the information. This woman had logged more hours in space than he had on the bench. Maya's watch buzzed quietly, likely another message from Mission Control. She glanced at it briefly before returning her attention to the judge, her expression neutral, but somehow managing to convey both respect for his authority and absolute certainty in her own position. Cooper set the folder down carefully, suddenly aware that this routine traffic court session had become anything but routine. The woman before him had piloted spacecraft traveling 17,000 miles per hour, yet here she stood, accepting his authority over a 12-mile-per-hour speeding incident with perfect composure. The irony wasn't lost on him, but more than that, he felt the weight of his own assumptions pressing against his conscience. The morning sun continued its steady climb through the courthouse windows, its light now seeming to bend around Maya Patel like a solar corona, highlighting the extraordinary nature of this ordinary moment. Jenny Martinez, the court clerk of 3 years, couldn't stop her hands from shaking as she held her phone beneath her desk. The NASA app she downloaded during last month's meteor shower had just sent an alert. Commander Maya Patel to lead demonstration of new spacesuit designs at Space Center Houston today. The ceramic coffee mug, a birthday gift from her space-obsessed 10-year-old daughter, slipped from her fingers. It shattered against the floor in perfect sync with her realization. The sound echoed through the courtroom like a starting gun, drawing all eyes to her desk. I apologize, Your Honor, Jenny stammered, but her eyes remained fixed on Maya. But, Commander Patel, I watched your spacewalk last year with my daughter. She dressed as you for Career Day. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Marcus, still waiting for his own case, pulled out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen as he searched. Eleanor Washington, the piano teacher, adjusted her glasses, squinting at Maya with newfound recognition. Maya offered a kind smile to Jenny, who was now desperately trying to clean up the coffee spill while maintaining her professional composure. Your daughter sent me a lovely letter about that Career Day, she said softly. I remember the photo she attached. She did an excellent job with the spacesuit design. Judge Cooper sat perfectly still, the weight of the moment settling around him like a heavy cloak. The NASA credentials in front of him took on new meaning as context expanded around them, like the universe itself. Commander Patel, he said, testing the title that now replaced the simple Ms. from moments before. According to these records, you've commanded 3 missions to the International Space Station. Maya nodded, her hand still absently tracing the mission patch in her pocket. Yes, Your Honor. The most recent concluded 2 months ago. We conducted experiments on growing food crops in microgravity and tested new water recycling systems. The morning sun caught the subtle silver threads in her suit jacket, the same color as the solar panels that powered her home among the stars. Jenny had finally gathered the broken pieces of her mug, but remained rooted in place, unwilling to miss a moment of this unexpected intersection of earthly justice and space exploration. The morning of the ticket, Maya continued, her voice carrying easily through the now silent courtroom. We were monitoring a situation that could have affected those same experiments. 6 astronauts currently on the station depend on those systems. A young girl in the gallery raised her hand as if she were in school. Her mother tried to lower it, but Judge Cooper, perhaps seeking a moment to collect his thoughts, nodded in her direction. "Did you see any aliens up there?" she asked, her voice full of wonder. The question broke the tension like a meteor-breaking atmosphere. Gentle laughter rippled through the courtroom as Maya smiled. "No aliens," she replied, "but I saw sunrise 16 times a day, and our planet looking like a perfect blue marble suspended in darkness." Judge Cooper cleared his throat, drawing attention back to the matter at hand. But the courtroom had transformed. The mundane business of traffic violations had given way to something larger, a reminder that extraordinary stories often hide behind ordinary moments. Jenny finally returned to her desk, carefully placing the broken pieces of her mug in a tissue. She'd have to tell her daughter about this moment, about how the woman she dressed as for career day stood in their courtroom with the same grace she showed floating in space. The morning light streaming through the windows seemed to carry extra significance now, its journey from the sun feeling more personal, more immediate. After all, the woman standing before them had been closer to its source than anyone else in the room could imagine. Judge Cooper's reading glasses slipped down his nose as he studied the tablet his clerk had placed before him. The screen displayed NASA's official website, Commander Maya Patel's biography filled with accomplishments that made his 15 years on the bench seem suddenly modest in comparison. Harvard Medical School graduate, Air Force flight surgeon, 347 days in space, principal investigator for 15 microgravity experiments, 2 patents for medical devices developed for long-duration spaceflight. His courtroom had hosted senators, mayors, and business leaders, but never someone who had literally risen above Earth's boundaries. The morning sun warmed his back through the tall windows, yet he felt a slight chill, the same kind he'd experienced when his grandson first explained how vast space truly was. "Commander Patel," he began, his voice carrying a new note of respect, "your credentials are impressive." The word felt inadequate the moment it left his lips. How does one adequately describe someone who had circled the planet more than 5,000 times? Maya stood with the same quiet dignity she'd shown since entering his courtroom. "Thank you, Your Honor. Though today I'm simply a citizen appearing before the court." Her humility only emphasized the extraordinary nature of her presence. From the gallery, phones emerged like stars appearing at dusk, their screens illuminating amazed faces as people discovered who stood among them. Jenny, the clerk, had composed herself but couldn't stop glancing between her computer screen and Maya, as if confirming that this moment was indeed real. The morning in question, Judge Cooper continued, removing his glasses to clean them again, a nervous habit he thought he'd overcome years ago. "You mentioned life support systems. Could you elaborate on what was at stake?" Maya's expression shifted subtly, professional concern mixing with passionate expertise. The oxygen regeneration system on the ISS showed irregular readings. 6 astronauts depend on that system, colleagues and friends I've trained with, lived with, and promised to support from the ground. The judge's hands still on his glasses. His morning docket suddenly seemed less pressing, and the situation was resolved. "Yes, Your Honor. We identified a software calibration issue and implemented a fix within 2 hours. The crew was never in danger, but in space, we treat every anomaly as critical. There's no room for assumptions or delay when dealing with life support systems 250 miles up." Cooper replaced his glasses, noticing how the courtroom had leaned forward collectively, drawn into Maya's world where routine decisions carried the weight of survival. His own perspective began to shift, like gravity losing its hold. "Commander," he said, "earlier you mentioned seeing sunrise 16 times a day. Would you mind telling us what that's like?" The question surprised even him. In 15 years, he'd never deviated so far from traffic court protocol. A warm smile crossed Maya's face, transforming her professional demeanor into something more personal. "Imagine, Your Honor, watching our entire planet spin beneath you. Every 90 minutes, darkness turns to light. Cities glitter like constellations, and you realize how connected we all are on this pale blue dot we call home." The courtroom fell silent, each person lost in their own visualization of Earth from space. Judge Cooper glanced at his family photo, thinking about how his grandson would react to this story at dinner tonight. The boy's space-themed bedroom suddenly seemed less like a child's fantasy and more like a window to real possibilities. His bow tie felt slightly too tight as the weight of his earlier assumptions pressed against his conscience. Here he sat, passing judgment on traffic violations, while before him stood someone who had helped push the boundaries of human achievement. The irony wasn't lost on him, nor was the lesson in humility it offered. The formal atmosphere of Courtroom 3B had transformed into something remarkable. Judge Cooper's gavel lay forgotten on his bench as Maya answered questions from an increasingly enchanted audience. The morning sun painted the room in warm golden light, as if the universe itself wanted to be part of this unexpected gathering. "How do you sleep in space?" asked Marcus, his earlier nervousness about his own traffic ticket completely forgotten. His borrowed tie had come slightly loose, but he didn't notice, too captivated by Maya's description of sleeping floating upright, tethered to a wall. Eleanor Washington, the piano teacher, raised her hand delicately. "I teach my students about rhythm and timing. Does music sound different up there?" Her eyes sparkled with genuine curiosity behind her reading glasses. Maya's face lit up with the question. "Sound travels differently in the space station. I actually played a digital piano we have up there. Mozart floating in zero gravity has a magic all its own." She smiled warmly at Eleanor, who clutched her heart, clearly imagining the scene. Jenny, the clerk, had abandoned all pretense of maintaining court records. Her phone was out, recording with permission, as she whispered into it, "See, sweetheart. Remember when you dressed like Commander Patel? She's right here in our courthouse." Judge Cooper found himself leaning forward, his years of judicial stone-facing forgotten. "Commander, you mentioned earlier about seeing our planet from above. Has that changed how you view everyday matters?" The question held layers of meaning, acknowledging his own shifted perspective. Maya considered for a moment, her hand absently touching the mission patch in her pocket. "From up there, you don't see borders or divisions. You see one interconnected world. Traffic tickets, daily rushes, minor frustrations, they take on a different meaning when you've watched lightning storms dance across continents and seen the thin blue line of our atmosphere protecting all of us." A young law intern, carrying a stack of files, paused at the courtroom entrance, sensing something unusual. He remained rooted in place as Maya described the delicate process of conducting scientific experiments in microgravity. His files, full of legal precedents and municipal codes, suddenly seemed to hold less weight. "What's the scariest part?" called out a voice from the back of the courtroom. "Not the launches or spacewalks, like most people think," Maya replied thoughtfully. "It's the responsibility. Every decision you make affects not just your crew, but the future of space exploration itself. Whether you're commanding a spacecraft or driving to work, your choices matter." Judge Cooper nodded slowly, understanding the subtle message in her words. His own position of authority felt different now, illuminated by this new perspective. The morning's remaining cases waited patiently, but for once, the efficient flow of justice had yielded to something larger. A small girl, perhaps 7 or 8, who had come with her mother for a minor parking violation, raised her hand high. "Can girls really be astronauts?" she asked, her voice tiny but clear in the hushed courtroom. Maya stepped away from the defendant's position, moving closer to the gallery. "Come here," she said gently to the girl. From her blazer pocket, she withdrew her mission patch, the same one she'd been touching throughout the proceedings. She knelt down, eye level with the child. "This patch flew with me on 3 missions," Maya explained, placing it in the girl's hands. "And yes, girls can absolutely be astronauts. We can be judges too, or clerks, or anything else we dream of. The view from space shows us that the only real limits are the ones we place on ourselves." The child's eyes widened as she traced the embroidered edges of the patch, holding a piece of history that had orbited the Earth thousands of times. Her mother wiped away a quiet tear, understanding that her parking ticket had accidentally led her daughter to a life-changing moment. The next morning dawned clear and bright over Houston, touching both the courthouse and Space Center Houston with the same golden light. Judge Richard Cooper arrived early, pausing at his parking space to look up at the sky. Somewhere up there, the International Space Station was making its silent journey across the heavens. His chamber door was already decorated with his grandson's latest artwork, a crayon drawing of a figure in a spacesuit floating among carefully sketched stars. "To the best grandpa ever, from your future astronaut," read the caption in wobbly letters. Last night's dinner conversation had been filled with nothing but space talk, his grandson hanging on every detail of Maya's courtroom appearance. Jenny arrived at her clerk's desk carrying a new coffee mug, this one adorned with the NASA logo. Her daughter had insisted on ordering it immediately after watching the video from yesterday's proceedings. The broken pieces of her old mug sat in a small box on her desk, now precious mementos of an extraordinary moment. "Good morning, Your Honor," Jenny said, handing him the morning's docket. "You might want to see this." She pulled up the local news website on her computer. The headline read, "Justice Meets Space. Local Traffic Court Transformed by Astronaut's Appearance." The article had already gone viral, sparking discussions about perspectives, assumptions, and the extraordinary people walking among us. Comments poured in from around the world, many sharing their own stories of unexpected encounters that changed their worldview. Meanwhile, across town at Space Center Houston, Maya adjusted her flight suit before stepping onto the stage for her presentation. The audience was larger than expected. Word had spread about yesterday's court appearance. In the front row sat Marcus, the teenager from court, wearing a perfectly knotted tie. Beside him was Eleanor Washington with 3 of her piano students and the young girl who had received Maya's mission patch. Back in his chambers, Judge Cooper opened Maya's case file one last time. The standard find form remained blank, a reminder of how quickly certainty could transform into wonder. Instead of the fine, he picked up his pen and began to write. "Case dismissed. With gratitude for a lesson that extends far beyond traffic laws, a reminder that justice, like space exploration, requires us to see beyond our immediate assumptions." His signature flowed across the page just as his phone buzzed. It was a message from the Houston School Board. They wanted to start a program bringing professionals from various fields to speak with students. Would he be interested in participating alongside Commander Patel? The judge smiled, touching the space drawing on his door. Yesterday, he had witnessed more than just an unusual traffic court session. He had seen the power of perspectives shifting, of worlds colliding in the most unexpected ways. In his courtroom, the morning docket was about to begin. The same sun that had witnessed yesterday's transformation streamed through the windows, catching the edge of his newly polished nameplate. Today, he would look at each case differently, remembering how a routine traffic stop had opened a window to the stars. The bailiff called out the familiar words, "All rise." Judge Cooper straightened his bow tie, took one last look at his grandson's drawing, and stepped into his courtroom. As he settled into his chair, he noticed something different in the faces before him, or perhaps the difference was in how he saw them. Each person standing where Maya had stood might have their own extraordinary story, their own mission patch tucked away in a pocket. The first case was called, and Richard Cooper, 15-year veteran of the bench, began his day with a new appreciation for the infinite possibilities hidden within ordinary moments. Somewhere high above Houston, the International Space Station continued its eternal dance around the Earth, a reminder that sometimes justice, like gravity, needs to be tempered with wonder.